Looking at example 3, we're going to convert these two points that are in polar form to rectangular form. There's only 2 steps for this. It's pretty straightforward. You just find x by substituting into our cosine theta equation, and you find y by plugging into the y equals our sine theta. So x is going to equal -1 times the cosine of pi over 3. Y is going to equal -1 times the sine of pi over 3. Now for the first one, you are technically allowed to use your calculator when we ask you to round something to the nearest tenth, but the cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2, so I know that this is just -0.5, right? I just need to multiply that by -1. For the sine, we'll use our calculator. All right, so we do -1 times the sine of pi over 3. So I get -0.866. We're rounding to the nearest tenth, so I'm just going to have it. The final answer would be -0.9 for this one. Approximately -0.9. So the point -1 pi over 3 in polar converted to rectangular is -0.5, -0.9. Now a good idea is to see if that makes sense. You know, just are you in the right quadrant? I mean, if you plotted -0.5, -0.9, you know you're down here, right? We know we're in this quadrant right here. So let's make sure that pi over 3 -1 falls in that quadrant. So pi over 3 -1 means I would go up pi over 3, or -1 pi over 3, excuse me, and +1 would land me in the first quadrant, but -1 is going to reflect over to the fourth quadrant. So at least our answer makes sense. All right, let's try the next one. Same thing. On this problem, we're definitely going to use a calculator because 325.9 degrees is not a special angle. We want to make sure that we're in degree mode. So I know that x is equal to 4.32 times the cosine of 325.9. And y is going to equal 4.32 times the sine of 325.9. Again, we'll make sure we're in the right mode. So we'll get into degree mode. And we'll do... All right, so I've changed my mode to degree, and I've entered 4.32 times the cosine of 325.9, giving me around 3.6. And 4.32 times the sine of 325.9 is giving me -2.4. So the equivalent ordered pair for this polar pair is going to be 3.6 and -2.4. And again, I want to check and make sure that this makes sense. Am I in the right quadrant? So when I think of, in this case, the 3.6 and the -2.4 is going to land me in the fourth quadrant. And the polar coordinate, the 325, is definitely going to be in the fourth quadrant. And since r is positive here, we're going to stay in the fourth quadrant, right? If r was negative, it would have been reflected back up here, but it's not. So that makes sense. Both of these points fall in the fourth quadrant. You can certainly double check your answer by working backwards. All right, so at this point, I want you to pause the video and do practice problem 3. For part A, we're not going to use our calculator, and we'll just leave our answers exact. So the x-coordinate is going to be 4 times the cosine of 6, which would be 4 times the square root of 3 over 2, which would be 2 square roots of 3. The sine of pi over 6 is 1/2, so 4 times 1/2 is just going to be 2. And so your ordered pair in rectangular coordinates is going to be 2 square roots of 3 and 2. And again, just checking the quadrants. Pi over 6 is in the first quadrant. Since r is positive, then you're still in the first quadrant. And the point 2 square roots of 3, comma 2 is also in the first quadrant. So that makes sense. All right, this next one we're going to use our calculator for. All right, so when I plug into my calculator, the negative 8.5 cosine of 72, and I make sure that I'm in degree mode, I get negative 2.6 for my x-coordinate, and I get negative 8.1 for my y-coordinate. So the rectangular coordinates that are equivalent to negative 8.5, 72 degrees, are negative 2.6, negative 8.1, and again, we're going to check and see what quadrant this falls in. So the point falls in negative, in the third quadrant. The point would fall down here, the negative 2.6, negative 8.1. If we plotted negative 8.5, 72 degrees, where 72 degrees would be in the first quadrant, we'd be in the first quadrant if r was positive, but because r is negative, it's going to reflect, like we said, 180 degrees. It will end up in the third quadrant. So this answer does make sense. And just in summary, when you are converting from polar to rectangular, it's just really important that you make sure you check your mode on your calculator. And I think it's also helpful to draw those angles to make sure that you're falling in the right quadrant.